Telling this story isn't easy. It's full of sadness and painful memories, but for some strange reason, I need people to know what happened. Maybe I just can't carry this alone anymore. My name is Blake, and I was married for 4 years. My marriage wasn't long, but I thought it was built on love, and that was all that mattered to me. But things weren't as perfect as they seemed. What happened to me was something I never could have imagined. My father-in-law took advantage of me in my husband's house in a moment I'll never forget. The shame and fear that followed nearly destroyed me. I should feel nothing but disgust, but what eats at me the most is that, in some twisted way, I enjoyed it. That guilt has haunted me ever since. Now, I'm left alone with my son, who may never know what it feels like to have a father in his life. My husband, Charles, didn't deserve what I did to him. I betrayed him, and though I wish I could say I wouldn't do it again, I can't promise that. It's as if I'm trapped in this cycle of regret and self-destruction. My punishment is this loneliness, and a child who'll grow up without his dad. Charles and I were high school sweethearts. Our families always knew we'd end up together, and after graduation, we even went to the same college. It felt like a dream. He was kind, loving, and everything I thought I needed. But sometimes, what you think is love just isn't enough. During college, things between Charles and me seemed perfect on the surface, but that's when the first cracks started to show. I got close to one of my professors, let's call him Brian. He was everything Charles wasn't. Where Charles was gentle and kind, Brian was tough, distant, and mysterious. For reasons I didn't fully understand, I was drawn to him. The attraction grew stronger, and soon we were having an affair. I kept it hidden from Charles. Looking back, I don't know how I pulled it off, lying about study sessions and non-existent assignments just to spend time with Brian. One lie even led me to a weekend trip to Rome with him. I told Charles it was a field trip for class, but really, it was 3 days of passion and indulgence. We didn't tour the city. Instead, we stayed in a hotel room, drinking and sleeping together day after day. I knew I was breaking Charles's heart, but I couldn't stop myself. Then, everything came crashing down. Brian was found dead in his apartment. The police ruled it a suicide, but I know what happened. I know who did it. But that's a secret I'll take to my grave. For 2 weeks, I was lost in my grief, and surprisingly, Charles was my rock during that time. He had no idea about the affair, and he stood by me through it all, loving me without question. Eventually, I fell back into our life together, and things seemed to return to normal. My feelings for Brian faded, and I stopped thinking about what had happened. Charles became my focus again, and soon he proposed. We got married in a small, intimate ceremony surrounded by people who loved us. It was a beautiful day, and for a while it felt like everything would be okay. But that peace didn't last. Shortly after we got married, Charles's mother passed away. It was sudden, and it hit both Charles and his father hard. We stayed with his father to help him through the grief. In those first few weeks, everything felt heavy. Grief hung in the air like a fog. Charles's father, who had always been a strong presence, was now broken and lost without his wife. During that time, I started to feel something strange. I had always admired my father-in-law, but now, spending so much time with him, those feelings grew stronger. It started out as a harmless crush, or at least that's what I told myself. He was handsome, older, and carried himself with a certain strength that fascinated me. But I never thought I'd act on it. Charles left for a few days to take care of some work, leaving me alone with his father. At first, it was just me helping him with household chores, trying to bring some life back into the house. We cooked together, watched TV, and had long talks about his late wife. Slowly, he started to open up again, and I felt like I was helping him heal. Then, things changed. One night, we were sitting together on the couch, closer than we probably should have been. I didn't think much of it at the time, but looking back, it was the start of something dark. I rested my head on his shoulder, and he shifted closer. The boundary between what was appropriate and what wasn't started to blur. The next day, I made a terrible choice. After dinner, we watched a movie together, one I shouldn't have picked. It was explicit, and it stirred something in both of us. By the time the movie ended, there was a thick tension in the room. I could feel it, and I knew he could too. I should have left. I should have gone to bed and pretended nothing had happened. But I didn't. Instead, I went upstairs to take a shower. I don't know what I was thinking, but I was restless, aroused, and confused. I heard the bathroom door creak open and assumed it was Charles coming home. But when I called out, there was no answer. Then my father-in-law walked in. He stood there, in his boxers, his desire obvious. In that moment, I froze. Part of me wanted to scream to tell him to leave. But another part of me didn't. The part of me that had always been attracted to him wanted this. And that part won. I didn't resist. I let him come closer. I let him touch me. We stood there in the bathroom, the water pouring down, and I didn't stop him. He kissed me, and I didn't kiss him back, but I didn't push him away either. I didn't say no. And that's when everything spiraled out of control. We ended up in bed together. It was intense, overwhelming, and wrong in every way. But I couldn't stop. What I didn't know was that Charles had come home early. He walked in on us. He saw everything. Without a word, he picked up a bat and struck his father across the head. The impact was brutal. His father collapsed, blood pouring from the wound. Charles didn't even look at me. He just cradled his father's lifeless body, sobbing. In that moment, everything fell apart. Charles confessed to killing his father. But what shocked me even more was what he told me next. He admitted that he was responsible for Brian's death. He had killed him out of jealousy and fear of losing me. I was stunned. The man I thought I knew was capable of such violence, and now, because of my actions, 2 people were dead. Charles was arrested that night. The neighbors had heard the commotion and called the police. They took both of us into custody, but it didn't take long for Charles to confess. He told them everything, about walking in on his father and me, about the murder, and even about how he had killed Brian. He didn't try to hide anything. He didn't want a trial or a drawn-out case. He just wanted to take responsibility for what he had done. I sat there, numb. It felt like everything was crumbling around me, and I was powerless to stop it. In the span of a few hours, my husband had killed his father, confessed to another murder, and my secret affair with Brian had come out. There was no turning back now. Charles was sentenced to life in prison. I still remember the look on his face when the judge read his sentence. He looked relieved, as if this was the only way things could end. He didn't look at me once during the trial, not even when I tried to explain myself. I didn't get a chance to tell him I was pregnant. That's right. I found out I was pregnant not long after the whole ordeal. But even now, I don't know if the child is Charles's or his father's. That uncertainty is a weight I carry every day. My son is 3 now, and every time I look at him, I wonder whose blood runs through his veins. I wonder what kind of future he'll have, growing up without a father. I tried visiting Charles once in prison. I thought maybe he'd want to see the boy, to at least know what his son looked like. But when I showed up with the baby in my arms, Charles didn't want anything to do with me. He looked at the boy for a second, then spat in my face. He turned around and walked back to his cell without saying a word. I haven't tried visiting him since. The guilt I feel is unbearable. It's like I'm living in a nightmare that I can't wake up from. I destroyed my marriage, my family, and my husband's life. I broke Charles's heart, and in the end, I think I broke something inside him that can never be fixed. And now I'm alone. I can't seem to find another man. It's like there's a stain on me that no one else wants to touch. Maybe this is my punishment. Living with the consequences of my choices, raising a child I'm not sure is mine, and knowing that the man I loved is locked away for the rest of his life. I don't know how to move forward from this. Every time I look at my son, I see the reminders of what happened. And every night, I lie awake, replaying that day in my head, wondering how things got so out of control. I thought I had everything. A loving husband, a beautiful future, but I threw it all away because I couldn't control my own desires. And now I'm left with nothing but regret. It's been 3 years since Charles was sentenced, and the pain hasn't lessened. My life feels like a shadow of what it once was. I can't escape the past, and I'm haunted by everything I've done. I think about how different things could have been. If I hadn't cheated, if I hadn't let my desires get the best of me, if Charles hadn't walked in at that exact moment. But those ifs don't matter anymore. What's done is done. I'm raising my son alone now. He's the only light in my life, but even he is a reminder of my mistakes. I don't know who his father really is, and I may never know. Every time I look at him, I feel the weight of that uncertainty. Will he grow up without a father because of me? Will he ask questions I can't answer? These thoughts run through my mind constantly, and I'm left wondering how I'll ever explain what happened to him when he's old enough to understand. Charles isn't coming back. Even if he did, there's no way to fix what's broken between us. I'm stuck living with the guilt of my choices and the mess I've made of my life. And as much as I want to say I've learned from my mistakes, part of me is terrified that I could make the same ones again. The truth is, I'm still lost. For now, I focus on raising my son. He's the only thing that matters anymore. But the loneliness is crushing, and the weight of what I've done is something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. If you want to hear more stories of infidelity and the consequences they bring, click on the video you see on the screen. Thanks for listening.